Good morning. Today is Thursday, April 2nd, 2026, and this is the Urban Hope Refuge Morning Devotions. We are continuing our reading today from the 2026 Daily Bible Reading Guide published by the American Bible Society. I want to give a shout out to the Connecticut Northern Diocese for a beautiful service on last night in New Haven. The seven cries on the cross. Those men preached their hearts out, and we were so blessed. Thank you so much for blessing us during this season as we are moving up to the Resurrection Sunday services. The theme for 2026 is God's surprising word, and the April focus is rejoicing in hope. Today, I am reading Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 26 in the New Living Translation. So, this passage of scripture gives details the early morning trial of Jesus. It talks about his betrayal by Judas and his sentencing by Pilate. Religious leaders wanting Jesus dead, they take him to Pilate. Judas experiences remorse and hangs himself, while Pilate, despite knowing Jesus' innocence, succumbs to crowd pressure and releases Barabbas, condemning Jesus to be crucified. Verse 1. Very early in the morning, the leading priest and the elders of the people met Jesus again to lay plans for putting Jesus to death. Then they bound him, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priest and the elders. I have sinned, he declared, for I have betrayed an innocent man. What do we care? They retorted. That's your problem. Then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple and went out and hanged himself. The leading priests picked up the coins. It wouldn't be right to put this money in the temple treasury, they said, since it was payment for murder. After some discussion, they finally decided to buy the potter's field, and they made it into a cemetery for foreigners. That is why the field is still called the field of blood. This fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah that says, they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price at which he was valued by the people of Israel, and purchased the potter's field as the Lord directed. Our sub-theme, Jesus' trial before Pilate. Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. "Are you the king of the Jews?" the governor asked him. Jesus replied, "You have said it." But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. "Don't you hear all these charges they are bringing against you?" Pilate demanded. But Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. Now it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner to the crowd, anyone they wanted. This year, there was a notorious prisoner, a man named Barabbas. As the crowd gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" He knew very well that the religious leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message: "Leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night." Meanwhile, the leading priest and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So the governor asked again, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" The crowd shouted back, "Barabbas." Pilate responded, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared. But the crowd roared even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours." And all the people yelled back, "We will take responsibility for his death, we and our children." So Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. And this concludes our reading of Matthew 27, verses 1 through 26. This passage of Scripture is a powerful and painful turning point in the life of Jesus. Jesus is brought before the Roman governor. Judas, filled with remorse after betraying Jesus, returned the 30 pieces of silver and tragically took his life. Despite finding no fault in Jesus, Pilate yields to the pressure of the crowd, the people choose to release Barabbas, a known criminal, instead of Jesus. Jesus is sentenced to be flogged and crucified. This passage highlights injustice, betrayal, political pressure, and human weakness. But it also reveals God's hidden plan unfolding. Now, what does all of this mean? At first glance, this moment appears to be one of defeat, but it is actually divine purpose in motion. One, we see the innocent for the guilty. Jesus, who was sinless, is condemned, while Barabbas, who was guilty, is set free. Now, this is a living picture of substitution. Jesus takes the place of humanity. We also see human failure versus divine plan. Judas represents regret without redemption. The religious leaders represent hardened hearts. Pilate represents compromised conviction. He knew that Jesus was innocent, and the religious leaders were envious. The crowd represents easily swayed minds, and they were swayed. The crowd was swayed by the religious leaders. Yet, despite all of this, God's will is still accomplished. Now, God's surprising word, what looks like loss, is actually a pathway, the pathway to victory. What looks like injustice is actually the setup for salvation. God's plan still prevails. That's what we can learn from this passage of scripture and this devotional today. With all of that I have described to you and read to you in the scripture, that horrible day in the life, horrible time in the life of Jesus, painful, God's plan still prevails. Even when people make wrong choices, God's purpose, hear this, God's purpose is not canceled. So our lesson from this is God is sovereign, even in chaotic and unjust situations. We can also learn that not all sorrow leads to hope. Not all sorrow leads to hope. Judas felt remorse, but instead of turning to God, he turned inward and lost hope. Conviction should lead us to God, not away from Him. The danger of the crowd mentality. The same crowd that once praised Jesus now calls for His crucifixion. The lesson that we can learn is to be careful not to let public opinion override spiritual truth. Look at all of this that Jesus is teaching us on his way to the cross. So we also learn that Jesus took our place. Barabbas walks away free, the criminal, because Jesus took his sentence. Listen, believe it or not, we are Barabbas, guilty, yet released because of Jesus. My God, my God. We are Barabbas, guilty, yet released because Jesus took our sentence. As I close, hope is hidden in hard places. What looks like the worst moment may carry the seed of our greatest hope. Listen, I am asking you, as we are approaching Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday, pray your way through the day. Walk with the King and be a blessing.